Hey friends, welcome to Stuff You Can Sleep To. Tonight's episode, Hangover Cures Throughout History, your soft-spoken guide through centuries of questionable choices and even more questionable remedies. Picture this. You're lying in bed, head pounding, stomach churning, swearing to whatever gods are listening that you'll never touch another drop. Sound familiar? Well, you're in remarkable company. Humans have been making this exact same promise for literally thousands of years, and we've been trying to fix the aftermath with increasingly creative, let's call them solutions. From ancient Egyptian pond sludge to Roman gladiator blood, from medieval mouse roasts to Renaissance emerald smoothies. Tonight, we're exploring humanity's endless quest to cure what we probably shouldn't have caused in the first place. So, if you're already feeling drowsy, don't fight it. This episode is designed exactly for that: slow pacing, soothing tones, and just enough peculiar historical facts to occupy your mind while your body settles into sleep. And if you like what you hear, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know what the best hangover cure is in your corner of the world. I'm always collecting humanity's worst ideas, so you don't have to try them yourself. It's time to lie back, hopefully without the bed spinning, and let's begin our journey through time, regret, and some really bad decisions. Welcome to ancient Egypt. The year is 2500 BCE. The Great Pyramid is still under construction. Workers hauling limestone blocks under the blazing desert sun. And at the end of each backbreaking day, they are given their payment. Not gold, not silver, but beer. About a gallon per person. Yes, you heard that right. A gallon every day for every worker. Now picture waking up the next morning in your mud brick house along the Nile. Your head feels like it's been trampled by a sacred bull. Your mouth tastes like the bottom of a sandal. And you've got another 12 hours of pyramid building ahead of you. The sun is already brutal. The foreman is shouting at you, and you're wondering if maybe you should have paced yourself with that barley beer. This is where our story begins, with the world's first recorded hangover cures. The Egyptians, bless them, thought that they had it figured out. Their go to remedy was fermented lotus flowers. They called it the cure of the Nile, which sounds poetic until you realize what it actually was. Basically, pond sludge in a bowl that you drank. Imagine the texture: thick, murky, tasting like what you'd expect a swamp to taste like. But hey, it came from the sacred Nile, so it had to be good for you, right? The lotus flowers had been sitting in stagnant water for who knows how long, fermenting in the Egyptian heat, developing that special flavor that can only come from decomposition and desperation. If the lotus sludge didn't work, and let's be honest, it probably didn't, the healers had a backup plan. They'd grind up myrrh, that precious tree resin used in embalming, and mix it directly into wine. Because nothing says healing like adding the substance you use to preserve dead bodies to your morning beverage. Picture the scene. You're a skilled craftsman, maybe a scribe or a stone carver. You stumble to your local healer, clutching your throbbing head. He nods knowingly, disappears into his workshop, and returns with a cup of wine that smells suspiciously like a mummy's wrappings. Drink this, he says with confidence. It's myrrh wine. The gods will bless your recovery. And you drink it because, well, what choice do you have? We know about these remedies because the Egyptians were excellent record keepers. A papyrus from around 1000 BCE that's older than most of the ruins you can visit today, contains detailed instructions for hangover treatment. But here's the kicker. After listing all the elaborate preparations, the grinding and mixing and blessing, the final line simply reads, "Then pray." Even ancient Egyptian healers knew when to admit defeat. But perhaps the most honest approach was the worker's method. When you're building monuments for pharaohs and your head is splitting, you don't have time for pond sludge ceremonies. You grab more beer. Mix it with honey if you're feeling fancy. Sometimes, if you're feeling really adventurous, you'd crush up some beetle shells and stir them in. That's right, beetle shells. Because if you're going to feel terrible, you might as well make it crunchy. The Egyptians understood something we're still learning today. Hangovers are universal. Rich or poor, pharaoh or peasant, everyone who overindulged had to face the morning after. And their solutions, however questionable, were born from genuine human suffering and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Now let's sail across the Mediterranean to ancient Greece, where great minds pondered life's biggest questions. What is justice? What is beauty? And most importantly, why does my head feel like it's been used as a battering ram? The Greeks, inventors of democracy and philosophy, also gave us Dionysus, the god of wine, madness, and really, really bad decisions. Think of him as the ancient world's patron saint of, I probably shouldn't have done that last night. Picture ancient Athens, maybe 400 BCE. You're a citizen who's just spent the evening at a symposium, not the boring academic kind, but the original Greek version, a drinking party with intellectual pretensions. You've been reclining on couches, debating the nature of truth, while working your way through amphora after amphora of wine with honey and spices. Now it's dawn, and you're lying on your sleeping couch feeling like you've been personally cursed by the gods. Your slave is trying to wake you because you have important civic duties. Maybe you're supposed to vote on whether to go to war with Sparta or judge a play competition. Democracy waits for no hangover. This is where Greek medicine comes in. And oh boy, did they have ideas. Aristotle, yes, that Aristotle, the guy who taught Alexander the Great, he swore by raw eel. Not cooked eel, mind you. Raw eel. Slippery, slimy, straight from the Mediterranean. He believed that the eel's natural oils would coat your stomach and absorb the toxins from the wine. So imagine being hungover and having to choke down a raw, writhing eel. The texture alone would be enough to make you reconsider your life's choices. But if you were a follower of Aristotle, you'd pinch your nose, open your mouth, and slide that eel down your throat, all while trying not to think about how it was still technically alive just a few minutes ago. If raw eel wasn't available, or if you simply couldn't stomach it, there was always the owl egg remedy. Owl eggs scrambled and eaten while still warm, because nothing says wisdom like eating the unborn offspring of Athena's sacred bird. The challenge, of course, was finding owl eggs. Owls are nocturnal, secretive, and not exactly cooperative about giving up their eggs. So you'd have to send your servant scrambling up olive trees in the pre dawn darkness, hoping to find a nest, hoping the mother owl didn't decide to defend her future children with her talons. Now, for those with more refined tastes and deeper pockets, there was the luxury option, a drink recommended by the physician Diocles. He prescribed warm wine, yes, more alcohol, mixed with ground pearls and rose petals. The pearls were supposedly for drawing out toxins, though no one could explain exactly how. The rose petals were for pleasant aromatics, which was ancient Greek for, well, making it smell less awful. Picture this preparation: your household slave grinding precious pearls into powder, their value probably worth more than most people's annual income, rose petals being carefully plucked and mixed in, creating a drink that looked like liquid luxury but tasted like regret with floral notes. The great philosopher Plato had his own take on hangovers. He called them the corruption of the soul through excess. Deep, right? But when you strip away the philosophical language, he was basically saying what we all know. Ugh, I feel gross, and I know that I did this to myself. The Stoics, those champions of enduring hardship with dignity, saw hangovers as character building experiences. Embrace the suffering, they taught. Let it teach you moderation. Marcus Aurelius probably woke up after a dinner party, head pounding, and thought, "This too shall pass, and I will be stronger for having endured it." Modern translation: just deal with it, and maybe don't do it again. But the most practical Greeks, well, they knew better. They developed the concept of moderation in all things, which sounds wise until you realize it came from people who regularly held drinking contests as entertainment. The truth is, ancient Greeks were just as human as we are. They made the same mistakes, felt the same regrets, and desperately sought the same impossible cure: a way to undo last night's decisions without having to live through the consequences. Welcome to ancient Rome, where too much was just the starting point. Picture this: you're a wealthy Roman citizen, maybe a senator or a successful merchant. It's the height of the empire, say 100 CE. You've just attended a banquet that lasted from sunset to sunrise, not unusual for Roman high society. The dinner had 7 courses, each paired with different wines from across the empire. There was wine from Spain, wine from the Greek islands, and that really expensive stuff from the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. You didn't just drink the wine, you experienced it. There were entertainers between courses, acrobats, musicians, poets reciting verses. You reclined on silk cushions, wearing your finest toga, discussing politics and philosophy, while servants continuously refilled your cup. The wine was mixed with honey and spices, sometimes warmed, sometimes cooled with snow brought down from the mountains. Now it's morning, and you're lying in your marble floored bedroom, feeling like you've been trampled by a herd of elephants. Your head throbs with each heartbeat, your stomach churns like a storm at sea, and you've got important business to attend to. Maybe you're supposed to appear in court, or oversee your estates, or attend a meeting in the Senate. This is where Roman medicine gets creative. The most popular hangover cure among the Roman elite was gladiator blood. Yes, you heard that right. Fresh blood from gladiators who had just fought in the arena. The Romans believed that gladiator blood carried the warrior's strength and vitality. They thought that drinking it would transfer that power to you, burning away the weakness of your hangover. Imagine the scene. You're barely able to stand, wearing yesterday's stained toga, and your personal physician arrives with a cup of warm, fresh blood. It's still steaming. You can smell the metallic tang, see the dark red liquid that was just moments before flowing through the veins of a man who was fighting for his life for your entertainment. And you drink it because you're Roman. And Romans don't do anything halfway. Now, if gladiator blood wasn't available, maybe the games weren't happening that week, or maybe you were too squeamish, there was always the backup option: pickled sheep lungs, served cold. The theory was that the lungs would breathe life back into your poisoned system, while the pickling process would provide the salt and vinegar needed to restore your body's balance. Imagine trying to chew through cold pickled lung tissue while your stomach is already rebelling. The texture was rubbery, the flavor was indescribable, and the smell, well, let's just say it didn't help with the nausea. Emperor Claudius, the guy who conquered Britain and built aqueducts, he had his own special remedy: raw eggs mixed with ground diamonds. And not just any diamonds, the finest gems from India and Africa, ground into powder by his personal servants. The eggs were supposed to coat his stomach, while the diamonds were believed to have purifying properties. Only a Roman emperor would think, I feel terrible. I know. I'll eat my jewelry. The preparation alone was a spectacle. Servants would carefully crack the freshest eggs, making sure that no shell fragments contaminated the mixture. Then they'd take diamonds worth more than most people's houses and grind them into powder using special mortars made from volcanic rock. The result was a gritty, expensive smoothie that probably did nothing except make Claudius feel like he was taking the most luxurious hangover cure in the world. Now, about those vomitoriums, those weren't really rooms where Romans went to throw up so they could eat more. Those were just the exit corridors in amphitheaters. But Romans did have their own relationship with vomiting. They saw it as a practical solution. If you felt sick, get it out of your system. No shame, no drama, just efficient Roman problem solving. The actual Roman hangover cure that most people used was much simpler: more wine with honey, sometimes with crushed pearls if you could afford them. The logic was straightforward: hair of the dog, Roman style. If alcohol caused the problem, more alcohol would solve it. But Pliny the Elder, the guy who died trying to rescue people from Mount Vesuvius, well, he had a different idea. He believed in fried canary, the whole bird, feathers and all, fried until crispy and eaten in one sitting. His reasoning was poetic. Birds sing, so they must restore harmony to the body. It's charmingly wrong, but you have to admire his logic. Romans also pioneered the luxury hangover cure. Wealthy citizens would retreat to private baths, where they'd sweat out the toxins in hot rooms, then shock their systems with cold plunges. They'd have slaves massage their temples with oils imported from Egypt, feed them special foods prepared by the finest cooks, and play some soft music to soothe their aching heads. The truth is, Romans understood something we're still learning: hangovers are democratic. Rich or poor, citizen or slave, everyone who overindulged had to face the morning after. The only difference was how much you were willing to spend on your suffering. Now let's drift eastward, across the Silk Road to ancient China, where scholars and poets gathered to contemplate life's mysteries over cups of rice wine. Picture ancient Chang'an, today's Xi'an, the capital of the Tang dynasty, around 700 CE. The city is a marvel of the ancient world. wider than Rome, more populous than Constantinople, with markets selling goods from as far away as Persia and India. You're a government official, maybe a poet or a scholar, and you've just spent the evening at a literary gathering. These weren't crude drinking parties like the Roman banquets. These were refined affairs, cultured men sitting in gardens, composing poetry, discussing philosophy, and sipping delicate rice wine from porcelain cups. The wine was clear and potent, flavored with chrysanthemum petals or osmanthus flowers. Each cup was a work of art, each sip a meditation. But morning comes, as it always does, and you're lying on your wooden bed, your head feeling like it's been stuffed with cotton and struck with a gong. The rice wine was deceptively smooth going down, but now it's exacting its revenge. You have duties to attend to. Maybe you're supposed to grade examination papers, or attend court, or write official documents for the emperor. This is where Chinese medicine shows its wisdom. The Chinese approach to hangovers was remarkably sophisticated. They understood that the body needed to process the alcohol, not just mask the symptoms. Their go to remedy was kudzu flower tea, shewa in Chinese. These small purple flowers from the kudzu vine were dried and steeped in hot water, creating a tea that actually helped the liver break down alcohol faster. Imagine sitting in your courtyard garden, still wearing yesterday's silk robes, sipping this bitter but effective tea while watching the morning mist rise from the lotus pond. The tea was earthy, slightly sweet, with a lingering aftertaste that somehow seemed to clear your head with each sip. If kudzu flowers weren't available, there was always watermelon juice. The Chinese believed that watermelon had cooling properties that would reduce the internal fire caused by too much wine. They would slice fresh watermelon, press out the juice, and drink it while it was still cool from the night air. Picture the preparation. Your servant carefully selecting the ripest watermelon from your garden, cutting it into perfect pieces, then pressing the juice through silk cloth to remove any pulp. The result was a sweet, refreshing drink that actually did help with hydration. Though the Chinese didn't know about electrolytes, they understood that the body needed fluids. And for more serious cases, these mornings when you could barely lift your head, there was congee, rice porridge cooked slowly until it became a smooth, comforting gruel. It was gentle on the stomach, easy to digest, and provided the carbohydrates your body needed to process the alcohol. The preparation of congee was almost meditative. Rice was cooked with 10 times its volume in water, stirred constantly until it broke down into a creamy consistency. Sometimes they'd add ginger for nausea or a few drops of sesame oil for richness. The result was comfort food that actually comforted. Chinese physicians also understood the importance of balance. They believed that alcohol created heat in the body, so the cure needed to be cooling. They'd prescribe chrysanthemum tea, made from dried flowers steeped in hot water, believed to reduce inflammation and clear the head. The most elegant cure was pear juice, fresh pears pressed and served cool. The Chinese believed that pears help the body process toxins, and modern science has actually proven them right. Pears contain compounds that help break down alcohol in the liver. But perhaps the most sophisticated approach was prevention. Chinese scholars developed the practice of drinking tea between cups of wine, eating small portions of food throughout the evening, and stopping before reaching excess. They understood that the best cure for a hangover was not getting one in the first place. Revolutionary thinking, really. Across the Yellow Sea in ancient Korea and Japan, they developed their own approaches to the morning after regret. In Korea, during the Goryeo dynasty around 1100 CE, imagine you're a court official who's just attended a royal banquet. Korean court culture was sophisticated. Officials would gather to drink soju and rice wine while discussing literature and politics. The drinking was formal, ritualized, with specific cups for specific occasions. But morning comes, and you're lying on your heated ondol floor, your head pounding like a war drum. You have to attend court, present reports to the king, maintain your dignity as a member of the educated class. This is where Korean wisdom shines. Haejangguk, literally hangover soup. Picture your servant preparing this in your kitchen before dawn. They start with a rich beef broth, simmered for hours until it's dark and concentrated. Then they add vegetables, napa cabbage, bean sprouts, mushrooms, and sometimes, if you're feeling particularly brave, congealed ox blood for extra richness and iron. The soup is served steaming hot, enough to make you sweat, salty enough to replace what you lost the night before, and you sit on your floor cushions, still in your silk handbook, and slowly sip this life restoring broth. The heat opens your pores, the spice clears your sinuses, and the protein gives your body what it needs to recover. Different regions had their own variations. In the south, they'd add fresh seafood, pollock or cod, still tender from the night's catch. In the mountains, they preferred pork spine soup, rich with marrow and collagen. Each bowl was a regional statement about how to properly recover from excess. Now journey across the Korea Strait to Imperial Japan during the Heian period, around 900 CE. You are a court noble, maybe a poet or a government official, and you've just attended a moon viewing party. Japanese court culture was refined to an art form. Nobles would gather to drink sake while composing poetry and appreciating the beauty of nature. The sake was served in small ceramic cups, warmed to the perfect temperature, paired with delicate foods that complemented its rice based flavor. The evening was elegant, sophisticated, a celebration of aesthetic perfection. But morning comes, and you're lying on your tatami mat, your head feeling like it's been visited by demons, and you have court duties, ceremonies to attend, the complex social obligations of imperial life to fulfill. Japanese medicine, again, they offered their own wisdom. The most revered hangover cure was ukon, turmeric root, ground into powder and mixed with warm water. It created a bitter golden drink that actually protected the liver from alcohol damage. The Japanese had been using turmeric for centuries, understanding its medicinal properties long before modern science caught up. Imagine the preparation. Your servant carefully grinding the dried turmeric root with a stone mortar, creating a fine yellow powder that stained everything it touched. Mixed with warm water, it created a drink that tasted like earth and healing, bitter but effective. For severe nausea, there was umeboshi, pickled plums so sour and salty they could reset your entire digestive system. These weren't ordinary plums. They were carefully selected, packed in salt for months, then aged until they developed an intense, puckering flavor that was both shocking and somehow cleansing. Picture trying to eat an umeboshi while hungover. That first bite would make your entire face contract, your eyes water, your mouth flood with saliva. But somehow, after that initial shock, your stomach would settle, your nausea would fade, and you'd feel human again. The Japanese also understood the importance of gentle foods. They'd prepare okayu, rice porridge, similar to Chinese kanji, but with its own subtle variations. Sometimes they'd add a few drops of soy sauce for flavor, or a small piece of pickled vegetables for gentle stimulation. Both Korean and Japanese cultures understood something profound. Recovery wasn't just about curing symptoms, it was about restoring balance to the body and spirit. Their remedies weren't just medicine, they were acts of self care, ways of showing respect for the body that had been pushed too far. Now we return westward to medieval Europe, whose medical knowledge had taken a few steps backward and common sense had apparently gone on vacation. Picture England in 1347, the same year the Black Death is sweeping across Europe. You're a merchant, perhaps a skilled craftsman, and you've just attended a guild celebration. Medieval drinking wasn't like the refined ceremonies of China or Japan. It was robust, communal, and often competitive. The ale was thick, dark, and strong. Beer was safer to drink than water, so people drank it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. At celebrations, they'd bring out the mead, fermented honey wine that was sweet, potent, and deceptively smooth. There was wine, too, if you could afford it, imported from France or the Mediterranean. And now it's morning, and you're lying on your straw mattress, your head pounding like a blacksmith's hammer. You have work to do. Maybe you're supposed to craft tools or trade goods or attend church. Medieval life didn't slow down for hangovers. This is where medieval medicine gets interesting. The dominant medical theory was the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If you had a hangover, it meant your humors were out of balance. The obvious solution? Remove some blood to restore equilibrium. Picture this: you stumble to the local barber surgeon, clutching your throbbing head. He nods knowingly, prepares his instruments, and proceeds to drain blood from your arm using a sharp knife and a bowl. The theory was that alcohol created too much hot blood, so removing some would cool you down and restore balance. It didn't work, of course. In fact, it probably made you feel worse by causing dehydration and weakness. But medieval medicine was confident in its theories, even when they were completely wrong. If bloodletting seemed too extreme, there was always trepanation. That's drilling a hole in your skull to let out the demons. This was considered a legitimate medical procedure performed by skilled practitioners who genuinely believed they were helping. The idea was that hangovers were caused by evil spirits trapped in your head, and giving them an exit route would provide relief. Imagine lying on a wooden table while a medieval surgeon approaches with a metal drill. The sound of the drill against bone, the blood, the genuine belief that this would help. It's a testament to human desperation in the face of suffering. For less drastic cures, medieval people had their own folk remedies. In England, the preferred cure was roasted mouse. Yes, an entire mouse. Roasted whole and eaten while still warm. The logic was that mice were small, quick creatures, so eating one would transfer their vitality to you. Well, picture having to catch a mouse while hungover, then roast it over your fire and eat it, fur, bones, and all. The smell alone would be enough to make most people reconsider their life choices. Germany had its own approach. Sauerkraut juice. Fermented cabbage brine, sour and salty, drunk straight from the barrel. This actually wasn't a terrible idea. The salt helped with dehydration, and the fermentation process created probiotics that aided digestion. Sometimes medieval medicine stumbled onto something that actually worked. France went for luxury. Ground unicorn horn mixed with wine. Of course, unicorns don't exist, so unicorn horn was usually narwhal tusk, imported at great expense from the Arctic. The wealthy would pay fortunes for a pinch of ground tusk, believing that it had magical purifying properties. Imagine being wealthy enough to afford unicorn horn and desperate enough to try it. The tusk was ground into powder, mixed with wine, and drunk while making prayers to various saints. It was probably the most expensive placebo in medieval Europe. But perhaps the most practical medieval cure came from an unexpected source. Arabic physicians working in Spain, they had discovered coffee, brought from Ethiopia through trade routes. Coffee was stimulating, helped with headaches, and provided the energy needed to function despite a hangover. This was revolutionary. For the first time in centuries, there was an actual hangover cure that worked. Coffee shops began appearing in major cities, and suddenly there was hope for the morning after. The monks, meanwhile, had their own special hangover ales. These were brewed with herbs like sage, wormwood, and what they called dragon's blood, which was just tree resin. The ales were bitter, medicinal, and probably mildly hallucinogenic. Monks figured if you were going to feel terrible, you might as well feel terrible and spiritual. The truth is, medieval people were just as human as anyone else. They made mistakes a lot. They suffered and they desperately sought relief. Their methods were questionable, their theories were wrong, but their hope was eternal. Now we move into the Renaissance, the age of rebirth, discovery, and some truly spectacular hangovers. Picture Florence in 1503, the same year Michelangelo is working on his David. You are a wealthy merchant, maybe a patron of the arts, and you've just attended a banquet hosted by the Medici family. Renaissance parties were legendary. They combined the excess of Rome with the sophistication of a new age. The wine was the finest in Europe, brought from the rolling hills of Tuscany and the sunny slopes of the Mediterranean. There was art everywhere, music performed by the best musicians, conversations with poets and philosophers and scientists. Leonardo da Vinci might have been at the next table sketching inventions between courses. Now it's morning, and you are lying in your silk sheeted bed, your head feeling like it's been used as a sculptor's chisel. You have important business to attend to, though. Perhaps you're funding an expedition to the New World, or commissioning a painting, or negotiating trade agreements. This is where Renaissance medicine gets creative. Leonardo da Vinci himself had a hangover cure: raw fish soaked in vinegar. Not cooked fish, mind you, raw fish marinated in strong vinegar until it was essentially pickled. Leonardo believed that the fish oils would coat the stomach while the vinegar would cut through the alcohol's effects. Just imagine trying to eat raw vinegar soaked fish while your stomach is already rebelling. The smell alone would be overwhelming, acidic, fishy, with that sharp bite of vinegar. But if Leonardo da Vinci recommended it, who were you to argue? The wealthy had access to more elaborate cures as well. Rich Italians built sudatories, essentially sweat chambers designed specifically for curing hangovers. These sudatories were small heated rooms where you'd sit and sweat out the toxins while servants brought you small sips of wine mixed with herbs. Let's set the scene. You're sitting naked in a small, intensely hot room, sweat pouring down your face, while a servant carefully feeds you spoonfuls of herbed wine. The theory was that sweating would purge the alcohol from your system, while the additional wine would prevent withdrawal symptoms. It was basically a sauna for shame. For those who couldn't afford private sweat chambers, there was always the hair of the dog approach. More alcohol consumed immediately upon waking. Renaissance people perfected this concept, creating elaborate morning cocktails designed to ease the transition from drunk to sober. The most popular was brandy for breakfast. Not just any brandy, fine aged brandy from France or Spain, sometimes warmed, sometimes mixed with honey or spices. The idea was that high quality alcohol would somehow counteract the effects of lower quality alcohol. This eventually evolved into more sophisticated drinks. The Bloody Mary has its roots in Renaissance hangover cures: tomato juice for vitamins, alcohol for hair of the dog, spices for stimulation. What started as morning desperation became an art form. But for true luxury, there was the emerald cure: ground emeralds mixed with wine, consumed while praying to various saints. The logic was that emeralds were green. Green represented nature, and nature represented healing. It was Renaissance reasoning at its finest: creative, expensive, and completely wrong. Imagine having emeralds ground to powder while you wait, then mixed into wine that probably cost more than people's annual income. The emerald powder was gritty, flavorless, and utterly useless, but it made you feel like you were drinking liquid money. The Renaissance also saw the rise of traveling medicine shows. Charlatans would travel from city to city selling these miracle cures for everything from plague to hangovers. These usually consisted of alcohol mixed with herbs, spices, and whatever else was available. The cures, well, they rarely worked, but the showmanship was quite entertaining. Picture a crowded marketplace, a man in elaborate robes promising to cure your hangover with a single sip of his special elixir. The crowd gathers, desperate for relief, willing to pay good money for hope in a bottle. But perhaps the most honest Renaissance hangover cure was also the simplest: time. Renaissance physicians were beginning to understand that hangovers were temporary, that the body would eventually process the alcohol and restore itself. This was revolutionary thinking. The idea that sometimes the best cure was simply waiting. Of course, waiting wasn't nearly as interesting as drinking emerald wine or sweating in a private chamber, but it was the beginning of actual medical understanding. The slow recognition that the human body was more complex than medieval theories suggested. Now drift with me onto the rolling decks of a 17th century ship, maybe an English galleon or a Dutch East India merchantman. Sails billowing, timbers creaking, the salt spray cold on your face. It's the golden age of exploration and of maritime hangovers because being seasick just isn't enough. Picture yourself a common sailor pulling a double shift on deck. Your daily ration, a gallon of beer or a pint of strong rum. It's not for fun. The water in the barrels is rank with algae and worms. Alcohol is your disinfectant, your medicine, your only relief from the misery of life at sea. But come morning, the world's still swaying. Only now it's not just the waves, but your brain sloshing in your skull like the leftover grog in your mug. The cure? Well, more rum, of course. Hair of the dog is practically the sailor's code. You stagger below deck, find the quartermaster, and beg for a double ration to steady your sea legs. If rum isn't enough, there's always pickled fish, herring, or salted cod, so briny it puckers your mouth and shocks you awake. The salt replaces what the rum stole, or so you hope. For captains and officers, the cure might be slightly more refined. Tea, if you're lucky enough to be near port, mixed with brandy or a squeeze of citrus. If you can get your hands on a precious lemon. They don't know it yet, but the citrus helps ward off scurvy and eases the hangover's ache. But for most, the best cure is simply bracing wind, a deck scrubbed clean by the waves, and the knowledge that no matter how badly you feel, there's still a horizon to chase. Now we cross the Atlantic to the New World, where survival itself was a daily gamble and alcohol was often safer than water. Picture colonial Boston in 1750, 25 years before the revolution would change everything. The city is a maze of narrow cobblestone streets, wooden buildings pressed together like teeth, and the constant smell of wood smoke, tar, and brewing ale. You are in the Green Dragon Tavern. That's the same tavern where Sam Adams and his fellow revolutionaries will soon plot rebellion. But tonight, politics can wait. The punch bowl dominates the center table, a lethal concoction of West Indies rum, muscovado sugar, fresh lemons, and spices that arrived on ships from the Caribbean. This isn't just a drink, it's liquid colonialism, every ingredient representing a different corner of the British Empire. The rum flows freely because it's cheap and plentiful. New England's triangle trade brings molasses from the Caribbean, distills it into rum in Boston and Newport, then ships it back out to buy more molasses. The colonists have inadvertently created one of history's most efficient alcohol delivery systems. But colonial drinking wasn't the refined affair of European courts. Picture yourself at that rough hewn table surrounded by merchants, craftsmen, dock workers, and the occasional gentleman farmer. The tankards are pewter, dented from years of use. The cider is hard, fermented apple juice with a kick that could knock a horse sideways. And when someone calls for flip, the tavern keeper heats an iron poker in the fire until it glows red hot, then plunges it into your mug of beer mixed with rum and sugar. The drink hisses and froths, filling the air with caramelized sweetness and the promise of tomorrow's regret. Morning comes with the same brutal efficiency as a New England winter. You're back in that tavern, but now the cheerful chaos of the night before has been replaced by the grim determination of the hangover. The fire crackles in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on faces that look like they've been carved from old leather. This is where colonial medicine gets creative, and by creative, I mean desperate. The tavern keeper, who doubled as the neighborhood's informal medical advisor, approaches with a cup of stone fence, hard cider spiked with rum. The logic was simple. If alcohol caused the problem, more alcohol would solve it. Hair of the dog colonial style. The drink was named for the stone walls that crisscrossed New England farms, presumably because drinking it made you feel like you'd been hit by one. But Benjamin Franklin, that master of self experimentation and practical wisdom, well, he had different ideas. In his almanac, he recommended plentiful sleep, water gruel, and, if possible, abstinence. Franklin had tested every hangover cure known to colonial society and concluded that time, bland food, and sobriety were the only real solutions. Of course, Franklin also invented the glass harmonica and flew kites in thunderstorms, so his advice came with a healthy dose of skepticism from his contemporaries. For those who couldn't follow Franklin's sensible advice, colonial taverns offered their own folk remedies. The most popular was a breakfast of raw oysters and pickled onions, sharp, briny, meant to shock your senses back to life. Picture slurping down a dozen cold oysters while your stomach churns, the salt and mineral taste supposed to restore what the alcohol had leached from your body. The onions, pickled in vinegar and spices, were meant to cut through the hangover fog. The frontier offered its own solutions as well. Trappers and mountain men swore by squirrel broth. Yes, an entire squirrel boiled with whatever wild herbs they could find: sassafras root, wild mint, maybe some pine needles for vitamin C. The broth was hot, gamey, and probably more nutritious than anything else available in the wilderness. You'd drink it while muttering prayers to whatever deity you favored, hoping the small creature's vitality would transfer to your suffering body. Native Americans, who had been dealing with European alcohol for over a century by this point, well, they had their own approaches. Some tribes used sweat lodges, intense steam baths that forced the alcohol from your system through pure, overwhelming heat. Others chewed willow bark, which contained salicin, the same compound that would later become aspirin. The colonists, slowly learning from their indigenous neighbors, began incorporating these remedies into their own practices. In the southern colonies, where the heat was oppressive and the humidity could drown you, the preferred cure was mint julep, bourbon, sugar, and fresh mint, served in a silver cup if you could afford it. The mint was supposed to settle your stomach, the sugar provided energy, and the bourbon, well, the bourbon was the bourbon. It was hair of the dog dressed up in gentleman's clothing. The wealthy had access to imported cures. Venetian treacle, a complex mixture of herbs and spices that supposedly cured everything from hangovers to plague. Peruvian bark, which contained quinine and actually worked for some ailments. Hungarian waters, distilled spirits infused with herbs and sold at astronomical prices. But the most interesting colonial hangover cure came from the mixing of cultures. In New Orleans, French settlers combined their wine drinking traditions with Caribbean rum and local ingredients to create what we now call the Sazerac: rye whiskey, sugar, bitters, and an absinthe rinse. It was sophisticated, complex, and effective enough to survive into the modern era. The Puritans, meanwhile, had their own complicated relationship with alcohol. They believed drink was a gift from God, but drunkenness was a sin. This led to some creative theological gymnastics when it came to hangover cures. Some Puritan ministers recommended fasting and prayer, believing that suffering was good for the soul. Others quietly suggested milk punch, rum mixed with milk and spices, while emphasizing the medicinal properties of milk. Colonial medicine was a strange blend of European tradition, Native American wisdom, African healing practices brought by enslaved people, and pure desperation. Doctors were scarce, medical knowledge was limited, and most people had to rely on folk remedies passed down through generations. The truth is, colonial Americans understood something we sometimes forget. Hangovers were a social problem requiring social solutions. The tavern, it wasn't just a place to drink, it was the community center, the news hub, the place where business was conducted and friendships were forged. When you showed up hungover, you weren't just seeking a cure, you were seeking community, understanding, and maybe a little forgiveness. As the revolution approached, these taverns would become the birthplace of American independence. The same men who shared hangover cures would soon share revolutionary ideas. The Green Dragon, the Bunch of Grapes, the Indian Queen. These weren't just drinking establishments, they were the informal governing bodies of colonial America. And when the shooting started, when the colonies declared independence and fought for their freedom, they did it with the same stubborn determination that they brought to surviving their hangovers. Hair of the dog, colonial style, applied to revolution itself. Tonight's episode is sponsored by Snorsure Sleep Gum. It's the only chewing gum engineered to lose flavor so fast you forget you're chewing it. Infused with gentle herbs like valerian, chamomile, and something else with a Latin name. You just pop a piece, chew slowly. Oh man, see you get sleepy. So get yourself some Snore Sure Sleep Gum. Not recommended while driving, and we're not responsible for you choking on it while you're sleeping. Now, back to the. Ugh. Now we step into the gaslit streets of Victorian London, where the fog rolls thick through narrow alleys, and the Industrial Revolution has transformed England into the workshop of the world. It's 1880, and Queen Victoria has been on the throne for over 4 decades. The city pulses with newfound prosperity, scientific discovery, and an unshakable confidence that civilization has finally arrived. Picture yourself in a gentleman's club in St. James's. Leather armchairs worn smooth by decades of use, crystal decanters catching the light from the gas lamps, and the air thick with cigar smoke and quiet conversation. You're surrounded by merchants who built fortunes on India's cotton, industrialists whose factories blacken the sky, and gentlemen whose inherited wealth stretches back to the Norman conquest. The evening's entertainment was suitably refined. Aged brandy from Napoleon's era, port wine from the Douro Valley, and perhaps a glass of champagne to celebrate the latest railway expansion. But underneath the veneer of civilization, Victorian drinking could be just as brutal as any medieval feast. Gentlemen's clubs were notorious for their bumpers, toasts that required draining your glass completely, again and again, until the room began to spin. Morning arrives with that same merciless precision as a factory bell. You're back in that club, but now the leather chairs feel like instruments of torture, and the gaslight seems designed specifically to drill holes in your skull. The servants move with practiced discretion, understanding that mornings at the club require a delicate touch. This is where Victorian medicine gets fascinating. And by fascinating, I mean terrifying. The Victorians believed they had conquered medieval superstition with the power of science. They had microscopes, chemistry sets, and an unshakable faith in progress. Unfortunately, they also had cocaine, laudanum, and a complete misunderstanding of what constituted safe medicine. Picture walking into a London apothecary on Regent Street. The shop is a temple to pharmaceutical ambition. Polished mahogany counters, rows of glass jars filled with mysterious powders, and labels written in elegant script promising miracle cures. The pharmacist, dressed in a spotless white coat, greets you with professional confidence. He's not some medieval barber surgeon. He is a man of science. Feeling poorly after last evening's festivities? He asks with a knowing smile. I've got just the thing. He produces a bottle of Vin Mariani, wine infused with cocoa leaves, endorsed by Pope Leo XIII himself. The label promises to restore vitality, banish fatigue, and strengthen the nervous system. What it doesn't mention is that you're essentially drinking wine mixed with cocaine. The coca leaves, imported from Peru at an enormous expense, were steeped in Bordeaux wine until the mixture turned a rich amber color. Imagine sipping this concoction while reading the morning paper. The cocaine hits your system like a lightning bolt, transforming your hangover into a state of artificial euphoria. You feel brilliant, energetic, ready to conquer the empire. The crash, of course, comes later, but Victorian medicine was more concerned with immediate results than long term consequences. Now, if wine wasn't sophisticated enough, you could try cocaine lozenges or powders sold openly in British apothecaries as cures for everything from toothaches to fatigue. These were marketed as wonder drugs, small white tablets or crystalline powders that promised to banish exhaustion and restore mental clarity. The cocaine, imported from South America at considerable expense, was mixed with sugar and various binding agents to create what physicians called medicinal stimulants. For those who preferred their medicine more traditional, There was always laudanum, tincture of opium mixed with alcohol. A few drops in your morning tea would certainly make you forget about your headache, along with most of your other concerns. Victorian households kept laudanum like we keep aspirin today, not understanding that they were essentially treating hangovers with heroin. The class system extended to hangover cures as well. The upper class had access to these imported remedies: Hungarian waters distilled with exotic herbs, German bitters made from secret recipes, and French tonics that cost more than most people earned in a month. The wealthy could afford to experiment with the latest pharmaceutical fashions. Picture a Victorian gentleman's morning routine. He wakes in his four-poster bed, rings for his valet, and requests his medicinal breakfast. This might include deviled kidneys on toast, lamb kidneys cooked with mustard, cayenne pepper, and Worcestershire sauce. The Victorians believed spicy food would stoke the fires of digestion and burn away the previous night's excesses. The valet might also prepare a corpse reviver, that is, gin mixed with lemon juice, orange curacao, and a dash of absinthe. The drink was literally named for its ability to wake the dead, and the absinthe provided an extra kick that could shock your system back to life. Now, the working classes, they had their own solutions, cruder but often more effective. A pint of porter for breakfast was common. Dark beer with enough alcohol to quiet the shakes, plus the B vitamins and calories needed to fuel a day of hard labor. Cold meat pies, pickled herring, and strong black tea with plenty of sugar provided the fat, protein, and caffeine needed to survive another day in the factories. But the real Victorian innovation was the patent medicine industry. Entrepreneurs realized that people would pay handsomely for hangover cures, especially if they came with scientific sounding names and impressive testimonials. The newspapers were filled with advertisements for Dr. Hoffman's Nervine, Professor Holloway's Universal Pills, and Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup. These medicines were often more dangerous than the hangovers they claimed to cure. Mercury pills were popular, based on the medieval theory that heavy metals could purge toxins from the body. The pills did cause violent purging, but they also caused mercury poisoning, brain damage, and death. The Victorians confused dramatic symptoms with effective treatment. Soothing syrups contained morphine, nervines contained cocaine, and tonics contained enough alcohol to qualify as a liquor. The Victorian medicine cabinet was essentially a drug dealer's dream, all sold legally with the blessing of medical authorities. The strangest Victorian hangover cure was probably the electric bath. Entrepreneurs had discovered that mild electric shocks could stimulate the nervous system. So they built these elaborate machines that delivered carefully controlled jolts to hungover customers. You'd lie in a metal tub filled with salt water while technicians applied electric paddles to various parts of your body. The experience was supposedly invigorating, though it was more likely terrifying. I mean, imagine being hungover and voluntarily submitting to this type of electrocution as a cure. The fact that people survive these treatments is a testament to Victorian resilience, or perhaps Victorian desperation. The truly wealthy had access to the ultimate Victorian hangover cure: a trip to the spa. Towns like Bath and Harrogate built entire industries around mineral water cures. You'd spend weeks drinking sulfurous water, taking mineral baths, and following strict regimens designed to purge your system of toxins. These spa cures were elaborate social rituals. You'd wake at dawn, drink glasses of foul tasting water while walking in carefully maintained gardens, then spend the day in mineral baths, massage rooms, and consultation chambers. The cures probably worked, but more because of the rest, the exercise, and abstinence than because of any magical properties of the water. The Victorians also pioneered the hangover breakfast as we know it today. The full English: eggs, bacon, sausage, black pudding, grilled tomatoes, mushrooms, and toast. It was designed to provide the fats, proteins, and carbohydrates needed to recover from a night of heavy drinking. It was hearty, greasy, and exactly what your body craved after too much alcohol. But perhaps the most telling aspect of Victorian hangover culture was the hypocrisy. The same society that promoted temperance and moral reform also consumed staggering quantities of alcohol. Gin palaces lined the streets of London. Beer was the standard drink for all meals, and patent medicines were often stronger than the liquor they were supposed to cure. The Victorians believed that they had transcended the crude superstitions of their ancestors, but they were still fundamentally human. They suffered, they sought relief, and they were willing to try almost anything that promised to ease their pain. The difference was that they dressed up their desperation in scientific language and sold it at premium prices. As the 19th century drew to a close, Victorian confidence began to crack. The same scientific method that had produced miracle cures also revealed their dangers. Doctors began to understand that cocaine was addictive, that mercury was poisonous, and that most patent medicines were elaborate frauds. But the Victorian legacy in hangover treatment was profound. They established the pharmaceutical industry, the spa culture, and the idea that science could solve any problem. They also proved that human nature doesn't change. People will always seek easy solutions to self inflicted problems, regardless of the era that they live in. Now we step into the electric atmosphere of 1920s New York, where the city never sleeps and the law is more of a suggestion than a commandment. Picture yourself on a sweltering July night in 1925, 5 years into the noble experiment of prohibition. The 18th Amendment has made alcohol illegal, but it hasn't made it unavailable. It's just made it more expensive, more dangerous, and infinitely more exciting. You're descending a narrow staircase beneath a flower shop in Greenwich Village. The password, Bee's Knees, still echoing in your ears. The heavy door swings open, and you're hit by a wall of sound: jazz music, laughter, the clink of glasses, and the low murmur of conversations conducted in hushed, conspiratorial tones. Welcome to the speakeasy, where America's rebellion against temperance plays out nightly in smoky rooms that officially don't exist. The bar stretches along one wall, its surface scarred by countless nights of celebration and regret. Behind it, bottles of questionable booze line the shelves: gin made in bathtubs, whiskey aged in car radiators, and cocktails designed to mask the harsh taste of alcohol that was never meant for human consumption. The bartender, a thin man with slicked back hair and a vest that's seen better days, greets you with a knowing smile. He's not just serving drinks, he's orchestrating a nightly rebellion against the federal government. The crowd is a mix of society's rebels, flappers with bobbed hair and shortened skirts, businessmen loosening their ties after a day of respectable commerce, jazz musicians taking a break between sets, and gangsters who treat the speakeasy like their private office. Everyone is here for the same reason: to forget that alcohol is illegal and to pretend that the party will never end. The drinks flow freely, but they're not the refined spirits of the Victorian era. This is bathtub gin, grain alcohol mixed with juniper flavoring and whatever else the bootleggers had on hand. It burns going down and leaves you questioning your life's choices, but it gets the job done. There's also giggle water, champagne of dubious origin that fizzes with artificial enthusiasm. The cocktails have names like Gin Ricky, Sidecar, and the aforementioned Bee's Knees. Drinks designed to make harsh alcohol palatable through liberal use of fruit juices, sugar, and creative mixology. But the real innovation of the era is the cocktail culture itself. Prohibition has turned drinking from a casual activity into an art form. Bartenders have become chemists, experimenting with combinations that can transform industrial alcohol into some approaching pleasure. The cocktail shaker has become the symbol of the age, a percussion instrument keeping time with the jazz band. Morning arrives, though, with that same brutal efficiency as a police raid. You're back in your apartment, but the world has taken on a sinister quality. The sunlight streaming through your windows seems designed specifically to punish your retinas. The sounds of the city, car horns, construction, the elevated train, they all combine into a symphony of suffering that penetrates your skull like a drill. This is where the 1920s hangover cure gets revolutionary. The speakeasy culture hasn't just changed how Americans drink, it's changed how they recover. The Victorian era treated hangovers as a moral failing requiring medicinal punishment. The 1920s treat them as an inevitable consequence of a life well lived, requiring creative solutions and social support. Picture yourself stumbling into the Algonquin Hotel's Oak Room at 11 a.m., seeking refuge among the literary elite who've made brunch into a competitive sport. The round table is already occupied by writers, critics, and wit wielding socialites who treat their hangovers as badges of honor. Dorothy Parker raises her glass in a mock toast. I like to have a martini, two at the very most. After three, I'm under the table. After four, I'm under the host. The solution to your suffering arrives in a tall glass filled with an alarming red liquid, the Bloody Mary. Now, this isn't just a drink, it's a complete meal disguised as a cocktail. Tomato juice provides vitamins and minerals. Vodka offers the hair of the dog that bit you. Worcestershire sauce adds umami complexity. And celery salt replaces the electrolytes your body's lost. The drink is also garnished with celery stalk that doubles as a stir and a light snack. The Bloody Mary was revolutionary because it acknowledged what the Victorians had tried to hide. Sometimes the best cure for drinking too much is drinking a little more, but doing it intelligently. The tomato juice masked the taste of alcohol while providing nutrition. The spices stimulated circulation, and the ritual of drinking it slowly allowed your body to recover gradually. But if the Bloody Mary was too sophisticated for your taste, well, there was always the prairie oyster, a hangover cure that required more courage than common sense. Picture the bartender cracking a raw egg into a glass, the yolk sitting like a golden eye in a pool of Worcestershire sauce, hot sauce, and vinegar. The challenge was to swallow it in one gulp, letting the slimy texture slide down your throat while the spices burned away your hangover. The prairie oyster was part cure, part dare, part initiation ritual. If you could keep it down, you were tough enough to handle whatever the day might bring. If you couldn't, well, at least you provided entertainment for the other patrons. The wealthy had access to more elaborate cures. Private clubs would offer recovery rooms where members could sleep off their excesses on leather couches, while uniformed staff provided ice packs, aspirin, and discreet silence. Some establishments offered hangover breakfasts, elaborate meals designed to restore what alcohol had depleted. Picture that typical hangover breakfast at the Plaza Hotel: scrambled eggs cooked in butter for protein and fat, bacon for salt and grease, toast for carbohydrates, fresh orange juice for vitamin C, and strong black coffee for caffeine. The meal was designed by chefs who understood that hangovers were essentially a form of malnutrition requiring specific nutrients to correct. The flappers, meanwhile, had their own approach to hangover recovery. They embraced the morning after as part of the adventure, treating hangovers as proof that they'd lived life to the fullest. Picture a group of young women sharing beauty tips and hangover cures in a powder room. Cold cream for puffy eyes, aspirin for headaches, and rouge to restore color to pale cheeks. The jazz musicians who provided the soundtrack to the decade had their own solutions. They swore by musician's breakfast, bourbon mixed with honey and lemon juice, drunk while tuning their instruments for the next night's performance. The honey provided quick energy, the lemon cut through the alcohol fog, and the bourbon, well, the bourbon is always just the bourbon. But the real innovation of the 1920s was the democratization of hangover cures. The speakeasy culture had brought together people from different social classes, and their hangover remedies began to mix and merge. Working class cures like beer and pickled eggs appeared alongside upper class remedies like champagne cocktails and elaborate brunches. The decade also saw the rise of the hangover industry. Entrepreneurs realized that prohibition had created a massive market for hangover cures, and they responded with everything from patent medicines to specialized restaurants. Hangover clinics appeared in major cities, offering everything from oxygen therapy to vitamin injections. The most popular commercial hangover cure was bromo seltzer, a fizzy powder that mixed with water to create a salty, effervescent drink. The advertisements promised immediate relief from the morning after the night before, and the product became so popular that its distinctive blue bottles became collector's items. But perhaps the most significant development was the social acceptance of hangovers. The Victorian era had treated them as shameful secrets requiring private suffering. The 1920s made them into shared experiences requiring communal solutions. The speakeasy culture had created a community of mutual support where everyone understood that last night's pleasure required this morning's patience. The decade also pioneered the concept of the hangover outfit, clothing designed specifically for the morning after. Women wore loose fitting dresses in forgiving fabrics, oversized sunglasses to hide bloodshot eyes, and comfortable shoes for unsteady walking. Men opted for soft collars, suspenders instead of belts, and hats with wide brims to shade sensitive eyes. As the decade roared towards its end, the hangover cures became more elaborate and even more desperate. The stock market was soaring, jazz was getting wilder, and the parties were lasting longer. People began to suspect that the good times couldn't last forever, so they tried to squeeze every drop of pleasure from each night, regardless of the morning's consequences. The crash of 1929 would end the party, but the hangover cures would survive. The Bloody Mary, the Prairie Oyster, the Recovery Brunch, these innovations would outlast the speakeasies that created them. The 1920s had taught America that hangovers were not moral failures, but social experiences, not punishments, but opportunities for creativity and community. In the end, the Roaring Twenties didn't just change how Americans drank, they changed how Americans recovered. They turned the morning after from a private shame into a public ritual, from a medical problem into a social solution. And in doing so, they created the modern hangover culture that still influences how we treat our morning after miseries today. Now we fast forward through the decades, watching as humanity stumbles towards actual understanding of what alcohol does to the human body. Picture yourself in a suburban ranch house in 1955, the morning after a cocktail party that celebrated everything America had become: prosperous, optimistic, and slightly drunk on its own success. The party was quintessentially mid century: martinis mixed with scientific precision, highballs served in gleaming glasses, and conversation that danced between atomic energy and the latest television shows. The adults wore their best clothes, the men in narrow ties and sharp suits, the women in circle skirts and pearls. Everyone smoked, everyone drank, and everyone pretended that the war was finally, truly over. But morning has arrived with the same democratic brutality it's always possessed. You're lying in your twin bed, staring at the ceiling fan that seems to be spinning in sync with your queasy stomach. The house is quiet except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the sound of your neighbor mowing his lawn with mechanical precision. This is where the 1950s make their contribution to hangover science: the medicine cabinet. Picture walking into your bathroom with its pink tiles and matching fixtures, and opening the medicine cabinet that's become the shrine of American pharmaceutical optimism. Inside, you find the miracle of modern chemistry: aspirin. Not just any aspirin, but Bayer aspirin, marketed with the confidence of a company that's convinced it solved one of humanity's oldest problems. The aspirin tablet is small, white, and perfectly round, a symbol of scientific precision. The bottle promises fast, effective relief from headache pain. And for the first time in human history, the promise is actually true. The salicylic acid that the Native Americans had extracted from willow bark has now been refined, purified, and packaged in a way that actually works. But the real breakthrough of the 1950s isn't just aspirin, it's the rise of Alka Seltzer. Picture the television commercial that would become one of the most recognizable jingles in American history. Plop, plop, fizz, fizz. Oh, what a relief it is. The product is simple: aspirin combined with sodium bicarbonate, designed to dissolve in water and provide both pain relief and stomach settling. The genius of Alka Seltzer isn't just its effectiveness, it's its theater. The ritual of dropping the tablets into a glass of water, watching them dissolve with dramatic fizzing, then drinking the resulting solution, transforms taking medicine into a performance. You're not just treating a hangover, you're participating in a scientific miracle. The 1950s also pioneered the concept of the hangover breakfast as a suburban institution. Picture your kitchen with its formica countertops and electric range, where your spouse, because this is the 1950s, gender roles are rigidly defined, she prepares the American hangover meal: eggs over easy, bacon, buttered toast, hash browns, and strong black coffee. This wasn't just food, it was nutritional rehabilitation. The eggs provided protein and choline. The bacon supplied salt and fat. The toast offered carbohydrates for energy. And the coffee delivered caffeine to combat fatigue. Without understanding the biochemistry, 1950s Americans had stumbled onto a nearly perfect hangover recovery meal. The 1960s brought counterculture and pharmaceutical revolution. Picture yourself at a San Francisco house party in 1967, where the cocktails of the previous decade have been replaced by more exotic substances. But when morning comes, the hangover cures have evolved too. Health food stores begin appearing in cities, selling vitamin B complex tablets, wheat germ, and exotic teas that promise to cleanse your system. The hippie movement embraced natural remedies with the same enthusiasm that they brought to everything else: ginseng tea, imported from Asia, and carrying the mystique of ancient wisdom; milk thistle, recommended by herbalists for liver health; vitamin C tablets taken in massive doses based on the theory that if some is good, well, then more must be better. But the real innovation of the 1960s was the discovery of electrolytes. Sports medicine was beginning to understand that athletes needed more than just water to recover, and enterprising marketers realized that hangovers and athletic performance had similar biochemical challenges. The 1970s brought us Gatorade, originally developed for the University of Florida football team, hence the name. The drink was designed to replace the salts and sugars lost through sweat. But hungover Americans quickly discovered that it worked just as well for replacing what alcohol had depleted. The bright colors and artificial flavors became the signature of 1970s hangover recovery. Picture yourself in a wood paneled rec room in 1975, lying on a brown shag carpet, sipping orange Gatorade while watching Saturday morning cartoons. The drink is sweet, salty, and artificially flavored, but it's also scientifically formulated to restore your body's chemical balance. For the first time in human history, hangover treatment is based on an actual understanding of human physiology. The 1980s escalated everything. Picture yourself in a Manhattan loft in 1985 after a night of champagne, cocaine, and the kind of excess that defined the decade. The hangover cure has evolved to match the intensity of this lifestyle. Vitamin injections administered by private doctors, oxygen therapy delivered through expensive equipment, and exotic supplements imported from around the world. This is the era of power recovery, treating hangovers with the same aggressive efficiency that defined 1980s business culture. IV drips filled with vitamins and electrolytes administered in medical clinics that catered to Wall Street executives. Supplements with names like Hangover Helper and Party Smart, backed by scientific studies and celebrity endorsements. The wealthy began treating hangovers like any other business problem. Throw money at it until it goes away. Private doctors made house calls, carrying briefcases full of medications and equipment. Recovery centers opened up in major cities, offering everything from massage therapy to acupuncture to colon cleansing. The 1990s brought the internet, and with it, the democratization of hangover information. Picture yourself in front of a bulky computer monitor in 1995, dial up modem screeching as you connect to the World Wide Web. Suddenly, centuries of hangover wisdom are available at the click of a mouse. Chat rooms discuss remedies, websites compare treatments, and email forwards share guaranteed cures. The decade also saw the rise of the functional drink industry. Sports drinks evolved beyond Gatorade to include specialized formulations for different activities. Energy drinks appeared, promising to boost performance and energy, and inevitably, hangover specific drinks hit the market with names like Chaser and RU21, claiming to prevent or cure hangovers altogether through advanced chemistry. But perhaps the most significant development of the 1990s was the understanding of alcohol's actual effects on the body. Medical research finally began to explain why hangovers happen: dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, blood sugar drops, inflammatory responses, and the toxic effects of acetaldehyde. For the first time in human history, hangover treatment could be based on science rather than superstition. The new millennium brought the era of biohacking, treating the human body like a machine that could be optimized through technology and chemistry. Picture yourself in a Las Vegas hotel suite in 2010, where hangover recovery has become a high tech enterprise. IV therapy clinics offer hangover packages with custom vitamin cocktails delivered directly to your bloodstream. Oxygen bars provide pure oxygen to clear your head. Cryotherapy chambers promise to shock your system back to health through extreme cold. The supplements have become increasingly sophisticated as well. Milk thistle for liver support, activated charcoal for detoxification. The wealthy can access hangover recovery services that would have seemed like science fiction to previous generations. But the real revolution of the 21st century is the smartphone app. Picture waking up after a night of heavy drinking and immediately checking your phone for hangover solutions. Apps track your drinking, predict your hangover severity, and recommend personalized recovery strategies. Delivery services bring hangover cures directly to your door. Telemedicine platforms connect you with doctors who can prescribe treatments without leaving your bed. The modern hangover cure industry has become a multi-billion-dollar business, offering everything from patch-based transdermal delivery systems to sublingual tablets to effervescent powders. The marketing promises are as bold as ever: eliminate hangovers completely, party without consequences, drink like you're 21 again. Yet, despite all this technological advancement, the most effective hangover treatments remain surprisingly simple: hydration, rest, time, and basic nutrition. The ancient Chinese were right about rest and fluids. The medieval Germans stumbled onto something with their fermented cabbage juice. The Victorians were accidentally correct about hearty breakfasts. The irony is that after centuries of human suffering and scientific advancement, the best hangover cure is still the most boring one. Drink less, hydrate more, get enough sleep, and eat well. The modern pharmaceutical industry has created increasingly sophisticated ways to treat hangovers, but they can't overcome the fundamental reality that alcohol is a toxin and the human body needs time to process it. As we move deeper into the 21st century, the hangover cure industry continues to evolve. Genetic testing promises personalized treatments based on your individual metabolism. Nanotechnology suggests targeted delivery systems that could theoretically neutralize alcohol's effects at the cellular level. Virtual reality therapy claims to distract your brain from hangover symptoms. But perhaps the most honest development is the growing acceptance that hangovers are simply the price we pay for the pleasure of drinking. The modern world has given us a safer alcohol, better medical understanding, and more effective treatments, but it hasn't eliminated the fundamental equation. If you drink enough to have fun, you might drink enough to feel awful the next day. The 20th century taught us that hangovers are not moral failures or spiritual punishments, but biochemical problems with biochemical solutions. The 21st century is teaching us that some problems are meant to be solved, while others are meant to be accepted with grace, wisdom, and perhaps a large glass of water. In the end, the story of hangover cures is the story of human nature itself, our endless capacity for both pleasure and suffering, our stubborn refusal to learn from experience, and our eternal optimism that tomorrow's miracle cure will finally solve yesterday's self inflicted problem. The cure for hangovers, it turns out, has always been the same: time, water, rest, and a little self forgiveness. Everything else is just expensive theater.